petrol neck, son of a bitch.
Mr. Dogburn?
What is it?
I'd like to talk to you a minute.
What is it?
They tell me you're a man with true grit.
What's your name, girl?
My name is Maddie Ross. We're located in Yale County. My mother's at home looking after my sister Victoria and my brother little Frank.
I'd best go home to them.
It's such a coveted role. It's the role of a lifetime. I mean, who wouldn't be attracted to it? She's a 14-year-old, tough, witty girl, and she has this goal, and she tells herself that she's not going to go on with life until she reaches her goal, and she goes for it. I came in at the very tail end of it all, and I was very fortunate to have gotten a final call. I was reading for the Coen brothers. I went in to the audition as Maddie Ross, what I felt was Maddie Ross. My mom threw a outfit together for me last minute from Salvation Army and made me a burlap skirt the night before from Joann's, and I felt really prepared, and I was ready, and it was a good feeling.
How much are you paying for cotton?
9.5 for low, middling, and 10 for ordinary.
We got most of ours out early and sold it to the Woodson brothers in Little Rock for 11 cents.
Well, then I suggest you take the balance of it to the Woodson brothers.
So it was like every day of that week just sitting by the phone, and the phone rang, and my mom picks it up, and all I hear is, okay, all right. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't get it. And I'm just thinking to myself, I can't believe this. And all of a sudden, my mom calls me down. She's like, Maddie Ross, there's somebody on the phone for you. So I'm just like, this feeling comes over me that this is real. This is actually happening. So I run downstairs. My dad's taking pictures of me. Everybody's on the phone, is screaming, and it was surreal. We shot in mainly Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Austin, Texas, and then a bunch of different places in Texas as well. I mean, I didn't get service on my phone at some times, but other than that, I loved it. The locations were absolutely beautiful, and I find that traveling is something that I really enjoy doing, and I'm so grateful that my job can take me places because it's something I really enjoy doing now.
Action.
Stand up, Tom Chaney!
Before I went on location, my dad took me to a shooting range because I wanted to make sure that that was something I was familiar with, and it really helped because obviously it wasn't what I expected, but I didn't know what to expect. So I mean, it really kicked me back, but that was good because on set filming that scene, there is no kick with the blank, but she falls back because of the kick of the gun. So it was really helpful. Well, I already know how to horseback ride. I used to ride English a couple years ago, so just it was about 2 weeks before filming, just horseback riding lessons and trail riding and just stuff to get back in the zone of Western riding.
Is that Marshal Cogburn?
So, you're the runaway. Marshal told me you'd show up. I'm to present you to the sheriff.
That is a story. Let go of my horse. I have business across the river.
The water was not cold. It was actually in the middle. It was a little cold, but not that bad. I had a wetsuit on under all my clothes, so it wasn't that bad. I have to say Joel did most of the talking, and what I love is like they're always making sure they're both okay with it. It's, what do you think, Eth? I'm good. How about you, Joel? Like totally making sure everybody was happy with it. It's amazing to see the way they work. It's like they don't even have to say anything to each other, but they're still on the same page. They were really flexible with any ideas that any of the actors had, and they were always, wanted to make sure that I was happy with the take that we did, and they were always open if I wanted to do another take or if I wanted to try something else. They were 100% open to do that. I mean, at the end of every day, it's like before I go to sleep, it's like I say to myself, do you realize what you just did today? And it's so amazing. It's like I said, it's a lot to comprehend, and I'm just so blessed, and I thank the Lord every day for putting me where I am, and I'm so thankful, and I'm so happy, and I'm exactly where I want to be.
When I started doing the research on this movie, you're vaguely familiar with this time period, but then you have to refresh yourself. And I did a lot of research. I did it for at least a month and a half. And what I noticed was that the women all had long hair, and the men all had facial hair. A lot of the men's clothes were in the charcoal gray family and the brown family and the black family, and their shirts were white or sometimes a textured stripe. And so we sort of based the color palette on that, because the women's clothing did come in lots of different colors, but for some reason it just didn't seem right for the story we were telling. And even if people were farmers, it's what they come to town wearing, particularly the gallows scene. It's their best outfit. It's 1870, and it's right when the bustle happened. It was actually a very short-lived phenomenon, and I love the idea of the hoop skirt. And so the majority of the women have a hoop skirt on, and I just wanted that domed shape to be sort of moving around the town, and I wanted to use some small prints on those dresses, or checks or plaids, but muted, but it would to animate the crowd because the men were going to be in such dark colors. We also wanted to make it urban in a way because we wanted it to differentiate completely when they go on the trail, and which is much more of a classic Western look. Like, as I was going through all the research, I was like, there's not a single real cowboy hat. Like, the cowboy hat with that crease did not exist in 1870. The majority of them were city hats that were just worn out. There were some guys who had bigger, wider hats, but they probably would have gotten them in Mexico. That's where the wider brims had started to make their way up. And then Stetson was a dress hat company in Philadelphia. The son had asthma and he went west. And he sort of started to see these cowboys and saw that they needed a hat for droving. And so he said, I think these guys need a hat with a wider brim. And he went back and he had his dad make them, and it was called the Boss of the Plains. And it's got a 4-inch brim and a 4-inch crown. And that's sort of the cowboy hat of this time period. It's not, you know, what you would normally think of as the quintessential cowboy hat.
One of the most important aspects of developing a character for me is the wardrobe, and that tells you all kinds of things about the character. So as far as the costumes go, I'd work with Mary Zofries, and I sure admire her expertise on the looks that we were going for, and she gave me all kinds of wonderful books to look at all the different styles that the guy might wear, and we worked together for a few days, figuring out the right hat for the guy, the right patch for the eye. Boots are always important.
He's one of my favorite costumes. I couldn't find a coat for him anywhere, and Celeste Cleveland, who's my cutter, had started that Monday. We were fitting Jeff, I think, on Friday. I was like, I can't find a coat, and she made one for me without really any measurements of him, and we had some measurements of him from another movie, and the minute he put that coat on, we were like, done, that's Rooster. It was like, that was and it has a big slit up the back, so when he gets on his horse, it kind of,
I'll send help for you as soon as I can. Don't wander off.
But it's not too grandiose, and it's really, really aged. He has a cutaway underneath it. We have him wear his holster underneath his gut because Jeff really doesn't have a gut, but he kind of thrusts it out when he's Rooster. He has a shirt, he has a vest, he has his coat, so it makes him look a little bit bulkier. Maddie's costume the idea is that she's come to town, she thinks she's going to take care of her business in about a day. She'd figure she'd go home in the same dress. She has one dress, her one going to town dress. And it's a feminine dress. She doesn't wear a hoop. She has petticoats underneath. When she decides to go on the trail, what she ends up doing is she takes her dad's pants, she takes her dad's overcoat, she uses her own coat that she's worn to town, and her dad's hat, and she puts those on with the same boots that she came to the town with. That's what she goes on the trail with. And she takes a belt off of her dad's saddle, and that's what she hoists it all together with. LaBeef is in buckskin. Nobody else in town wears buckskin. He's the only one for miles in buckskin. And so that was on purpose because we wanted him to sort of stand out as, it's described in the script as someone with maybe a little too much panache.
This was a character who had a lot of flair, from the buckskin jacket to the guns and the spurs and everything. It's tough to be taken seriously in a buckskin jacket, so that was kind of a fun, play a bit of a dandy.
His facial hair is a little bit more sculpted and groomed, and he's got fringe on his buckskin. And LaBeef's hat has a fancier hat, and his has a wider brim because he's from Texas and very close to Mexico, so it could have come from there. And he's taken the time to give his hat a certain blocking. It's got a curve on the side and it kind of goes over his eye. And again, it's like the buckskin coat. It's got maybe a little bit too much panache. It's scripted, and it's also in the book that Lucky Ned wears woolly chaps.
These were such a unique item because, we really hadn't seen that in Westerns, I think, since maybe Tom Mix. So they needed to be very specific. They needed to look lived in and well-worn.
And they were huge. They were big and white and woolly. And I was a little bit nervous that I was going to be wearing these monstrous big woolly white chaps. But she said, no, don't worry. These are going to get all dressed down, and very much in the Coen brothers sort of style of washing things out and really kind of as realistic as possible.
Woolly chaps are things that they're chaps made out of Angora. The front of them is made out of Angora, the back is leather. It was for rain, mostly. If the chaps got wet, it would repel the water just like on an animal. We had to have them made for him, and it was a really, really difficult job to age them. I had the most outstanding aging department on this movie. It was all about the aging, particularly the characters that are on the trail. Josh Brolin's meant to look like an animal. He should just look like a hairy animal. A lot of it was his facial hair, and like he got teeth, but you know, he's in a cutaway. It's sort of like as if he stole it from somebody. Like it's a little bit too small in the chest and a little bit too short in the length, but my thought was that he stole it off of somebody he killed. Having a great fitting with an actor and then watching all the elements come together when there's a big scene, and you know, the palette things you've talked about and all the alterations. Like, I'm a bit obsessive, and I do, like, even with all the principles and with all the background, it's like you're painting a painting with each person, and when you put all of those people together, it becomes an even bigger composition. And when they come to set, it's like harmony for me. It's like if it could be a sound effect, it would be voices just like, oh, you know, and that's how I get goosebumps every time. It all comes together and it looks how you want it to look, and it just comes from being collaborators, and that's how Joel and Ethan run their set. I think I love doing what I do because I work for them. Everybody talks to one another. It's how it should be. You know, it's a real collaboration.
In the course of figuring out how to shoot the movie, we happened to find a town here in where we're sitting right now in Granger, Texas. This was a railroad town back at the kind of the turn of the century, and some of these buildings are a little bit later than 1878. We managed to come in and try and bring things back another 25, 30 years.
In this particular location, we're recreating Fort Smith 1875.
We were fortunate because there's a lot of existing reference material on Fort Smith, Arkansas, and then there's just a lot of reference on towns of the time. One of the challenges is most of that reference is all black and white. So for us doing a color film, we want to make sure that we're doing something that plays into the time period, but also the look that we're trying to achieve. We spent a long time referencing colors that would be appropriate for the period.
The main thing that was important was to have a nice wide street. They had wide streets in those days so they could turn the wagons around. That's one of the things that when they settled on building on both sides of the streets, all the streets were wide. This happened to have that. It was cobblestone, which you see we had to put dirt down on, which we just did, and we're dealing with the rain, and it's muddy, it dries out, it's muddy, so it's starting to get packed down pretty nicely. And actually, I think it came out pretty damn good.
It's been about 3 to 4 months since we started. We've had lots of carpenters and scenics and greensmen. We've built facades over a lot of these buildings. We've built into some of the buildings. We've raised awnings. Making it winter is something we started in. In fact, one day it snowed when we were here, which is an uncommon occurrence in Granger. It was a nice way to see what it will look like when we add our snow to it.
I'll tell you what was here was 1, 2, 3. Those brick buildings, they were just flat, but the tops of them are really quite interesting. And the thing about what I'm trying to do with this Western, different from other ones, is to make it, you know, post-Civil War, not a coal mining town, no swinging saloon doors, you know. It needs to be America on the uprise and have some substantial buildings. And I think all these smaller cities like Fort Smith, Arkansas were trying to copy Chicago or New York. And this was the last stop on the train, you know. After this, you went into the wilderness. We couldn't do blocks and blocks of a town, so it was all about embellishing this block and that side street and carefully shoot it to, you know, make it look bigger than it is. You can see that once again it's got really interesting shapes on top of the building, which I love. From where that yellow wood building starts to the end, there's an existing post office behind the saloon, which we have to deal with every day, rightfully so. People coming to get their mail and driving in, and so it's a little bit of a hardship for us, but mainly probably more of a hardship for them. That's, you know, the whole town. That's our stable of carts and wagons, which will all have horses connected to them and make this street come alive. This tall, skinny building over here, this was not here. The street sort of ended there, and there was a big void in here, as you can see. The sidewalk continued across. We chiseled it out just to make it, you know, seamless into the town.
Nothing is real punchy in color. There's no bright, bright reds or bright, bright blues. We've stayed in things that are greens and off-whites and kind of keeps that sepia feel to things.
This was another sort of cornerstone for wanting to shoot in this town. It's a period bank. It's a little bit, it's probably like 1905 or 6, so it's a little bit ahead of our time, but we turned it back with some awnings and changed the signage around and put some plugs in the doors and things, and it fits in. It steps this town up a little bit from just the wooden facades. I love this building and how it fits in. This is the area we selected to shoot this gallows scene, which in the movie it's supposed to be winter, so we've been taking the leaves off of trees manually. That took a couple of people about, you know, a week on a cherry picker just to pick off the leaves. So whatever trees are in the shot, we're trying to, you know, make it look like winter. And that's just a great tree because we're going to have this big, you know, the big hanging scene, and there's going to be, I don't know how many, maybe a couple of hundred extras. And we're going to put some people up on that roof line up there watching, which is, I think it's going to be cool. It's just going to let the characters and the costumes take this scene over against that blank wall over there. I think it should be pretty good. So this is the boarding house in the movie, which is a facade, fake facade that we stuck in here, and these talented painters are aging it right now. Even though it's probably fairly new in the movie, it's just, we need to age everything down so it looks good on film. No fresh paint job ever looks good on a movie, especially for a Western, even though it's probably supposed to be new. And this street is the main shot. One of the main shots is down here. There was probably 6 telephone poles on either side with telephone lines and power lines running through them, which we had removed just so we could have this shot. There was a couple that were too expensive to take out, like this one, so we wrapped it in tree bark, and when you see it from this direction, it should appear to be a tree. This angle right here happens 4 times in the movie. So to achieve that, we had to build another little house here, and 2 facades deep in the background that have those chimney stacks on them, and then a little visual effect will just funnel into nothing over there. You could probably come around the back of this and see what's going on in some of the backs of the houses. So this is the back of this facade, and we do have a couple of shots looking out the front door. We have an interior that matches this down the block, which is the whole scene inside the boarding house.
Getting in the mindset of 1875 is challenging, and stopping and looking and see what things will tell a viewer that you're not in 1875, to really remind yourself there was no plywood. There was a lot of different things that we take for granted that we see all the time now weren't there. So really keeping focus on that has been hard, but exciting too. It's fun to remember what it may have been like.
It's really the first introduction to the town, where Maddie and a hand from the farm where she lives, they arrive in the town and they're going to retrieve the body of her father, and they arrive by steam train. And so we had a train, we had to get a hold of this period steam train that we brought in specially and made arrangements with the Union Pacific, who has the rail line that's here in Granger.
This is a standard gauge locomotive. It means it runs on standard gauge railroad track, which is the predominant track gauge in the United States, and that is 56.5 inches between the rails. It originally burned wood, and it was converted to oil later on when they discovered oil in East Texas and it was so cheap. It was originally built with a wooden cab. That cab was replaced with a steel cab, and then we still have that steel cab, and we replaced it with the wood cab to give it more of a period look. This is the builder's plate, and this is the 29,900th locomotive that Baldwin built, and it was built in January of 1907 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And that is the smoke box. And here are the cylinders, the valve chest and the steam cylinder, and that's where the steam comes to expand and drive the piston rod and turns the wheels. So it's completely self-contained as far as making its own air, compressed air for brakes, and its own electricity for lights.
Well, there's a lot of things going on up here, and normally when you're in operation, it's fairly loud up here, and the engineer and firemen learn to work with one another because you sometimes you can't even talk, so there's hand gestures and nodding, and everybody just sort of has to know what's going on to operate the locomotive efficiently.
There are 2 or 3 train coordinators in the country. I've been doing this since 1972. This is my 307th production. What typically happens is they'll either get me the pages or the script, and I'll do a breakdown of what the story is and see, okay, we got the train scene here and the train works here, and we'll get an estimate of how many days it is. We knew up front it was going to be about 1 day for this show. Anything and everything that happens has to happen within the constraints of a tightly regulated industry. So this engine is federally qualified to operate on any railroad in the country, provided they'll let you operate it. Anytime we have a train like this out on the railroad, it's magic time for people. They just get all excited, and the word spreads very quickly, especially in this internet age. There's a train in Granger. Next thing you know, you got lots of people out here.
It's exciting because this is the sort of thing where you've spent a lot of time and money, and our production designer, Jess Goncher, has created this fantastic, huge set. And when you build something and it looks this good and it's big, and you want to be able to show it off, obviously, a little bit. It's gratifying when you get to the moment where you're finally going to photograph it in the proper way and make it look really great.
In your years as U.S. Marshal, how many men have you shot?
Shot or killed?
Tom Cheney killed my father. Now I need somebody to go after him.
I'm a Texas Ranger. It is at least a 2-man job taking Cheney alive.
What is your intention? I mean to kill you today.
The Coen brothers have never made a Western before, so I think the audience is in for a surprise.
I'm looking for Tom Cheney. I will pay you a $50 reward.
What's your name?
My name is Maddie Ross.
It's not just a simple revenge story. The characters are so deeply drawn. It's really this coming-of-age story and this loss of innocence for this girl.
Nobody here knew my father, and I'm afraid nothing is going to be done about Cheney except I do it.
Maddie Ross is a tough 14-year-old girl who sets out to find the killer of her father, and she tells herself that she's not going to go on with life until she reaches her goal.
I am to get Tom Cheney, and if you are not game, I will find somebody who is game. They told me you had grit, and that is why I came to you.
I was concerned in the beginning because this was Haley's first movie, and after the first day of filming, I said, oh, God, did we ever luck out with her? She's just wonderful.
Sounds to me like you're still being hoorah'd by a little girl.
There is no hoorahing in it. My agreement with the marshal antedates yours. It has the force of law.
The force of law?
I remember doing my first kind of big scene with her. The brothers gave her a note, and she took it, and she did the scene different. They gave her another note, and she did it slightly differently again. And I said, has this kind of thing been going on while I haven't been here? Like, is she this good? I think she's just kind of a special case, and this role kind of found her at the perfect moment.
Papa took me and little Frank coon hunting last summer on the Petty Jean. We had a good time.
Coon hunting? This ain't no coon hunt.
Rooster Cogburn's a U.S. Marshal. He's got a foot in each side of the law. And Maddie's looking for a man with true grit. He certainly has that in spades.
I do not know this man.
Jeff was inspired casting, I thought. This was a perfect role for him because it's a really fun role. You know, Cogburn drinks too much, he's inappropriate, he bends the rules. He's kind of a classic American protagonist, imperfectly perfect. And Jeff brings this joy to his work that is really infectious.
We promised to bury the poor soul inside.
Ground's too hard. That man wanted a decent burial. They should have got themselves killed in summer.
I have to say, some of the things that he did surprised me. He's just such an amazing actor. I mean, you know, you read the book and you read the script and you have a vision in your mind of what you think it's going to be, and then you see these guys do it, and it's completely different.
My name is LaBeef.
Are you some kind of law?
That's right.
LaBeef, he's a little full of himself. He wants to be treated like his station with merit, you know. It's a big deal to be a Texas Ranger.
Congratulations, Cockburn. You graduated from marauder to wet nurse. Adios!
Matt brings a lot of comedy to it, and, you know, he rides beautifully, and he's got a great character going. So it was, you know, a real joy working with Matt.
You missed your shot, Cogburn.
Let's let this go.
I thought you were going to say the sun was in your eyes. That is to say, your eye.
You put Matt and Jeff together, and they're hilarious. We share a lot of laughs together.
I do not regret shooting your father.
Tom Channing is basically a drifter, and he ended up killing Maddie's father. He's a true sociopath, and he's capable of doing the worst kind of thing. I think that's the scariest kind of person.
Josh just did this thing with his whole bearing and with his voice. The first time he opens his mouth, you go, oh my God, I get it. I get what this guy's thing is.
I know you.
He was doing something so interesting vocally and the way he just moved to kind of create this guy. It's a really unique portrayal.
Chaney's here! Help me, Marshall!
Now what, Cogburn?
Them boys don't think about the wrath that's about to set down on him.
Who else down there?
Marshall Cogburn and 50 more officers.
I play Lucky Ned Pepper. He's sort of the bandit chief of this gang of scallywags, and Ned has the busted up teeth and a broken jaw, and his lips are all cut up. So he's an interesting looking character.
Barry is amazing, and I had never seen him out of hair and makeup except one time. And it was the funniest thing, because I have to tell you, I didn't even recognize who he was, because the makeup and the hair, it's all dirty and gross. And they're like, all three guys, they're really good looking, but it's like, you know, you would never tell. But I thought that was funny. He's an amazing guy.
No more talk.
Well, all of these guys, Matt, Barry Pepper, Josh Brolin, wonderful actors, and when you get great players like that, everybody's game rises up.
These performances, I mean, Haley's performance is just remarkable, as is Jeff's, and they all anchor the movie.
This movie, it's got a little bit of everything. You know, you get the wild characters and wild country, and you have the shootouts.
There's action, and it's got its comedic moments, and it's got the Coen Brothers twist to it, so it's got a little bit of everything.
The timeline in the book is, the math is fairly easy to figure out. Charles Portis did, you know, he did pretty in-depth research, and from the timeline, you know, we were able to figure out 1878 fairly easily. Anything that's done literary appeals to me, and I always will go to the book as a source of information, because sometimes a script is fleshed out bare bones, and you go back to the novel and you find little details that may not be included in the script that you can add, and it adds to the integrity of the film. Things that Rooster carried are not necessarily fleshed out in the script, but they are in the book. So I know that he carries his bullets in a sack, he carries a sack of corn dodgers, and that all adds to his character. There's a certain number of certain types of guns that existed in the time, certain types of holsters and gun belts. The guns are fairly easy to find. There's a couple of different places that import reproductions, and we use those. And we use the reproductions because they're safer, they're newer. I don't have anybody else's repairs on them. We don't use originals because oftentimes you don't know what has happened to those guns over the years and who's dealt with them. Plus, an original looks like it's 130 years old, and in 1878 your gun wouldn't really have looked 130 years old. The 66 and 73 Winchesters were the workhorse guns at that time, rifle-wise. There was the 73 Colt pistol, which Rooster carries on his belt. It wasn't a novelty, that was the thing a lot of guys depended on. She inherits her father's Colt Dragoon. It was an 1847 model. It was an enormous pistol, weighs about 4.5 pounds. It was designed to carry in a holster on the saddle, not in a holster on your belt. So it's curious that this is her only weapon that she has to carry. She inherited it. The occasion she has to use it, she gets one shot off, and the second shot is a misfire, and that was a fairly common thing with that kind of pistol. It was designed originally to shoot caps and balls. It was a cap and ball pistol, a percussion pistol. So you had to load the powder, then the ball, and then you had to cap the other end of the cylinder. So any number of things could happen. She's in the river to start with, so water and black powder normally soaks up moisture very quickly and makes it inert.
There.
Matt plays LaBeef, the Texas Ranger. In the book, he carries, his pistols have what she describes as white handles, which is an ivory or a pearl. So we went with a carved ivory handle on grips on his pistol. What he carries is a Sharps carbine, which Sharps was a brand, a manufacturer of a very long-range capable rifle at the time. The Sharps rifle itself, 1874, was famous for buffalo hunting, for shooting buffalo at long ranges, and the carbine is a shorter cavalry horseback version.
Tell me another lie and I'll stove your head in.
Ned Pepper carries a Remington 1875 pistol, which was another favorite. Frank James carried one, I believe. The actor Barry Pepper wanted black handles on the pistol. I thought of maybe if we inlaid that ebony handle with something like bone, that would break it up a little bit, put a little dimension to it. And so we went with a 4-leaf clover for Lucky Ned Pepper. I don't know how I really did this work before eBay and the internet. It's a funny thing. Things have changed in the material culture, and I try not to substitute things of the modern time in the place of the look of that time.
The reason I think Charles Portis should be the most popular writer in America is because for somebody of his talent, he's also very accessible. I mean, this is a guy who I think is as subtle and penetrating as any writer we would want to read.
Portis is not a genre writer. You can't predict what he's going to do, and that's another reason that other writers admire him and like him.
It's haunted me to this day as a thing to aspire to as a writer, even as a songwriter. To be able to capture, in the genius-like fashion that Charles Portis does so sublimely, moments of mundane reality that become, when looked at objectively, hilariously absurd. That's what Charles Portis is able to do.
He was interested in writing and in other people's writing and in how you did it, and he was going to be a novelist, and he knew it.
I'd say he's our era's Mark Twain, and the more times you read him, the more pleasure there is, and also the more and deeper resonances it has.
He's a very normal guy who wants his piece and who wants to write and takes some time about his writing, and unlike perhaps many other authors today, is not proactive in publicizing his books.
He managed to stay away from all that his entire career, and the result is that he's a mythic figure, not just among writers, but with readers as well.
There's something appealing about an author who is just going to let these few books speak for him. This is his legacy. What I know about Portis's early life, he was born in 1933 in a town called El Dorado, Arkansas. And after high school, he joined the Marines and went to Korea to fight in the Korean War. Returning to Arkansas, he enrolls at the University of Arkansas and chooses to pursue a journalism major, thinking it would be fun and not that hard.
He took up newspaper business because, as many of us did when you were in high school and you found out you could write a sentence, and it was fairly easy, and you say, well, writing is what, I mean, I can do this, it's not hard to do. What do? You get newspaper business. So, and I suspect that's why Buddy did it as well as I did. I think he had been at the Memphis Commercial Appeal, and then he had taken a job at the Arkansas Gazette. He had been a reporter writing the Our Town column, and he was writing that column probably four days a week, which was a terrible ordeal for anyone to write a humor column. You run out of material pretty quick.
Then he came up to New York to work for the Herald Tribune, which was a great writer's paper back in those days.
He didn't have a job offered to him, but he had approached the New York Herald Tribune about a job, and they said, well, yeah, if you're ever up this way, give us a call or something, come by to see us. And so he just, what the hell, he quit and went up there, and they hired him.
I met Charlie in 1962 when the famous 114-day newspaper strike had just begun in New York. I was working as a researcher at Newsweek magazine, and he came there to be a writer. The understanding was that he would go back to the Trib when it was over. When Charlie was working at the Herald Tribune, he had no telephone. Now, you have to understand, you can't be a newspaper reporter and not have a phone. They have to call you from time to time. They have to say to you, something just happened, go there.
I was very impressed, as the Trib was, with his range and the way he knew how to tell a news story. Not only get the information, but tell the story.
And I think they all come to respect Buddy more than probably anybody else. He was kind of an authentic character. He wasn't like all the rest of them. He was just a Southern boy who was with no pretensions.
And a couple years later, I believe 3 years later, is sent to London to be the bureau chief. In an interview, one of these rare interviews that he's given, he jokes that he got Karl Marx's old job because many years ago, Karl Marx actually held that same position in London. And Portis jokes that perhaps if they had paid him more, we could have saved the world a lot of grief. Portis does something so amazingly old-fashioned by deciding, that's all well and good, but I want to write a novel. He kind of quit journalism cold turkey to go back to Arkansas to write his first novel in a fishing shack.
I had no idea during our newspaper days that he wanted to write it. I don't remember his ever mentioning it. When he quit his job to go write a novel, we were all, you what?
Charles Portis did what all of us are trying to do. Writers have been running away from the 9 to 5 their whole lives, myself included, and very few can do it.
He just had, I think, that confidence and that calm that it would work out, and he never worried about it. I think his strength as a novelist and a storyteller kind of goes back to, as a reporter, and what made him a good reporter, which is that his very acute, intense observational skills and how people react.
Portis is a consummate writer's writer. He didn't get it sitting in a classroom. He got it sitting in bars and standing around in pool halls and garages and listening to the way people speak and getting this sort of experiential background that allowed him to write these very authentic novels.
I think anybody who reads them carefully can't doubt that Portis has an uncanny ear. In a way, I think Portis is like a poet, and I'm sure he would hate that description, but I mean it in the sense that he manages to make what we view as commonplace, or what we think is commonplace. He finds the freshness in it.
He never writes in a pretentious, condescending fashion to the reader, which allows you to take any non sequitur, disparate journey with him at any time.
Norwood, which is his first book, begins in Texas. It's kind of a road novel, but I think the centerpiece of that novel is in New York City. And it's just this wonderful outsider's point of view from the point of view of Norwood, who is a Texan who's from the South. And it's a great, great way of looking at just how ridiculous New York can be. One of my favorite moments is meeting a travel writer I think he lives on 11th Street, who is a travel writer who never leaves his apartment. He just makes up stuff about visiting Peru, and he's just sitting there in his apartment in New York.
The spark really went off when I bought a Penguin paperback of Norwood in London. And there was something about reading about somebody from Ralph, Texas in London that made it a little even more enjoyable.
And then 2 years later, I would argue he writes the great American novel.
I think True Grit is an egalitarian work of art, and the reason that I feel that way is that all my career I've been bombarded by the essays and the halls of academia that have these lame ideas about if a book is popular or if it hits the bestseller lists or it has mass commercial appeal, then it can't have a great deal of worth. And of course that's not true. It's very, very difficult to do what Charles Portis did. He wrote a book that is literary and also hit the public on a very emotional level. In other words, an English professor can appreciate this novel in the same way that an auto mechanic can. And that's an extremely difficult thing to pull off, but he did it.
After True Grit, many, many years pass, and we don't really know what's going on with Portis until 1979, when his novel, The Dog of the South, comes out.
The reason that was so hard, I think, is that he set himself the challenge of writing a novel with a boring narrator, who is Ray Midge, who is not only boring, but distinctly unappealing in lots of ways. Ray Midge is trying to find his wife, who has run off with another man and Ray Midge's car. They also took his credit card, so they're buying gas with his credit card, so he knows where they've been, so he's following the credit card receipts to catch up with them, which is just a wonderful beginning, wonderful hook.
Already we're setting up, again, a Charles Portis-like entanglement that is born out of ridiculousness that only reality can give birth to, really. He never broadcasts his convolution. He allows it to, in fact, unfold in the messy fashion that convolution should. Which is just kind of seeping up around your ankles and pant legs in a Charles Portis-like way when you look down and finally realize what you're standing in as you read. And he does it in Dog of the South, I think, better than any writer I've ever read.
I was just stunned by how offhandedly brilliant it was, how idiosyncratic, how it seemed to be, in some ways, a story of a dweeby guy, but it managed to somehow capture some longings and visions of secret America that few other writers have been able to do for me.
His next book, Masters of Atlantis, is, again, at least on the surface, completely different. That comes out in 1985. It's about secret societies, but it's also about sort of these classic American themes of being hoodwinked, of you know, there are charlatans and kind of like snake oil salesmen galore in this book. It's stories about Southerners out of their element or taken somewhere else. The last book that we have from him as of today, from 1999, it's a book called Gringos, which in many ways is a leaner narrative, slightly more direct. The character is a kind of a capable protagonist, much like Mattie Ross or Rooster Cogburn or even LaBeef in True Grit. Jimmy Burns in Gringos is another Korean War vet. He's living in Mexico. He deals in artifacts, pre-Columbian pottery, things like that. His associates, his colleagues, his circle of acquaintances consists of fellow Americans, fellow gringos who are down there, either serious scholars or charlatans, once again, people who are counterfeiting ancient goods, and kind of people on the fringes, people who are really interested in UFOs and alien races and things like that. And once again, it's done without condescension. It's done with a sense that Portis has really immersed himself in this culture.
I guess all of the novels turn out to be road shows in a way, but also for a writer, it's a good strategy. It keeps things from being static. You immediately have motion and narrative.
You know, he doesn't explain his characters. He doesn't try to save his characters. He doesn't feel sorry for his characters. He just lets his characters be.
They're people who we identify with, even though we may not be that character, but they've impressed themselves on us as real, and that I think is one of the distinguishing factors between traditional or conventional commercial fiction and Portis's books.
It's not the same voice in every book, but you always have the sense of I've never heard this voice before. I've never heard anything that quite sounds like this.
Every Charles Portis book is uniquely a journey unto itself. At the hands of a great adventure guide.
True Grit, when it came out in '68, could not have been more sort of out of its time.
It couldn't have been more removed from the counterculture movement that was going on. It's written in a very deliberate and stiff manner. There's nothing in it about anti-authority. You know, I don't think Portis was trying to write a commercial novel. I really don't. I think he was just trying to write a great novel.
Portis is great because of his own culture in Arkansas. He writes, as all great writers should, writes about what he knows, and he creates these characters that are out of what is traditionally not considered the Old West, the dusty tombstone West of the movies.
What's amazing here, I think, is both the complete authenticity of the voice. From the very first line, you don't feel that it's being written by Portis at all. You feel like this is Maddie Ross writing this down. But what's often forgotten is that it's not just Portis speaking as a 14-year-old girl. It's Portis speaking as that 14-year-old girl many decades later.
The point of view of this older woman writing about this wild adventure that she had as a young person. Who can do that? Not very many men, for sure, can do that. And but it's not just that. It's that he could find a voice and put himself in that voice and sustain it so brilliantly.
Maddie Ross in True Grit is trying to find the killer of her father, but really what she's looking for is a father figure.
We can all sympathize with this need for revenge. Somebody murders your father, you want revenge. But a 14-year-old girl doing that, like what kind of world is that where the only person who's going to see this through is Maddie herself?
People do not give it credence that a 14-year-old girl could leave home and go off in the wintertime to avenge her father's blood. But it did not seem so strange then, although I will say it did not happen every day. Maddie is looking for somebody with true grit. She finds him in Rooster Cogburn.
You know, hiring Rooster, and she wants to get her money's worth, and he doesn't want her to go along until he realizes that she's as good a man as he is. And LaBeef horns in on the deal because he's looking for Tom Cheney for another reason, and Rooster doesn't want LaBeef around, and LaBeef and Rooster are constantly going back and forth. And so it's this great triangle between the three of them.
I think Rooster Cogburn is one of the great characters in all of Portis's books, and Maddie as well, of course. But there's something both so clear about him. Like he is the hero. He is an anti-hero in some ways, but he's also the hero.
He doesn't even want to go on this journey, and he just throws up his hands at one point and he says, all right, I'm going to do it, you know. She has grit and steel, and she takes no man's shit, you know, and says she will not take no for an answer. She has as much grit as he does, and he recognizes that in her. It's why he acts heroically in the end. You know, this guy's almost a scoundrel in a way. But he goes out in that field and he faces off against Lucky Ned Pepper and his gang, and it's for her. True Grit gets its weight for me in the last part of the novel when we go to the voice of Maddie Ross as an old woman. And clearly the death of Rooster Cogburn has affected her because she's lost her father again.
The end of the book is just incredibly sad, just in the sense that life is sad. We all have regrets. We all have, memories of times places we'll never revisit. What is, kind of particularly affecting here, though, is Maddie's unwillingness or inability to really let loose emotionally.
This is the last paragraph of the book. I heard nothing more of the Texas officer LaBeef. If he is yet alive and should happen to read these pages, I will be pleased to hear from him. I judge he is in his 70s now, and nearer 80 than 70. I expect some of the starch has gone out of that cowlick. Time just gets away from us. This ends my true account of how I avenged Frank Ross's blood over in the Choctaw Nation when snow was on the ground. Well, the line, time just gets away from us, just always blows me away. One spoken by her.
She summarizes her experience in the almost, well, certainly Victorian Dickinson-like formality of statement about her life in the Indian territories, as a very formal kind of closure to this very informal and completely intimate journey. It's so brilliantly intimate, True Grit, as a story and as a journey. Its intimacy is its genius.
It's a very bittersweet ending to this book that describes the end of this journey for her that's now approaching, obviously. And it's not a beautiful end for this woman. If this in fact happened, if this adventure happened, the best time of her life was when she was 14 years old.
Well, baby sister, I don't think you can get $50. But if you're hungry, I'll take you home and give you supper.
I had seen True Grit, the movie, in 1969 with my dad at the Silver Theater outside Washington, D.C., and I thought that the book would just be the source material, sort of a bland source material for this movie that I knew so well.
One of the great things about the first True Grit movie for me is how much of Portis's language makes it into the character's speech. And it's just amazing how effective his verbiage is.
Don't get to jawing with these people, Moon. We'll get clear of this.
I don't like the way you look.
You talking to me, Ron?
Yes. I don't like the way you look. And I don't like the way you're cutting up that turkey. Rooster, Miss Quincy's making a mess of that turkey.
Do the job right, Quincy, or I'll have you eating them feathers.
I hope you go to jail.
I think to a certain kind of snobby/snotty literary elite, the John Wayne movie was a problem. It suggested that the book was too popular.
I think some people have said that the movie overshadowed the book and became his defining work to the detriment of his career, but I feel the opposite. I think he was very fortunate because of that movie and because the book became so popular. People like me read the rest of his library.
When True Grit was published in 1968, I think, it got a lot of attention and was a bestseller, sold a great number of copies. What is unusual is that it did not attach the success of True Grit to his other books, and yet both the charm and narrative drive of True Grit is there in different ways in the other four novels. There was a growing group of people that talked about the unfairness of Portis's books being out of print.
There was something wrong with our culture, with the human species perhaps, that Portis's works were out of print.
The business dictates that you have to go out and sell your book. You have to do a ton of interviews, book tours.
He doesn't participate in literary events. You know, he never goes out, he never promotes his books, he never does interviews, and hardly ever does interviews. And that hurts you in terms of getting well known.
He has this reputation, and I guess this is maybe the biggest part of his reputation, that he's kind of a recluse.
I wouldn't call him a hermit in any way. He wasn't unsocial. He was a completely charming human being, and he still is. He just liked being alone.
He wasn't a J.D. Salinger, hate the world kind of person. He just liked to write and fish and live his life. Now, I had previously requested an interview for Portis for a column I did for Esquire, and he turned me down. But as it turns out, that column in which I called on some brave publisher to do America a service by coming forward and putting all of Portis's out-of-print books back into print.
So there was a real effort on the part of people to find his books. That's something that a small publisher can build on. And we were very small then, and so we bought all of the books, and I think we did rescue him. I don't like to think that he was somebody who was drowning. He was just not being read.
He won an award recently, the Oxford American Magazine gave him and Morgan Freeman their first Lifetime Achievement Awards for Southern Arts.
When I called him, I let him know right off the bat that if he didn't accept it, it wouldn't hurt my feelings. My position was, if he showed up, great. If he didn't, well, we have another Charles Portis story to bandy about.
Morgan Freeman apparently made a nice, graceful speech of some length, and Portis got up and said, thank you, I'm not sure I deserve this, and sat down.
This is a very great honor for me, and deserving or not, I thank you, Mark, I thank you, Bill Whitworth, and I thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good night.
You know, it's a little bit scary to meet artists who you really admire, because sometimes they'll be less than what you want them to be. You build up these imaginary possibilities of how a great artist will be. But Charles Portis, in my experience, has always been genuinely humble and genuinely classy, and to me that's akin to his writing spirit.
There's so much curiosity about Portis's life, since he never talks about it. He has done one piece of autobiographical writing for me at the Atlantic Monthly. It ran in 1999. It was called Combinations of Jacksons. The Jacksons being Southern white guys like him. And it describes his youth and doing the ordinary things. But then he looks ahead to himself as an old man.
I recently saw a vision in broad daylight of the ghost of Christmas yet to come. The apparition was an old man at the wheel of an old Pontiac station wagon. The wagon was a long, sagging barge, packed inside to the roof with lumpy objects, bundled in green plastic tarpaulin and tied up with what looked like clothesline. Bits of chains, rolls of duct tape, forgotten cans of soup, jumper cables tangled around a jack frozen with rust, encrusted bottles of Tabasco sauce, sacks of Italian arrowheads, sacks of silver dimes, sacks of cat food. The old man was smirking. It was the gloat of a miser. Stiff gray hairs straggled out of the lower relief at the back of his cap just above the adjustment strap. And while not an ornament of our race, neither was he, I thought, the most depraved member of the gang. There I was in the flesh, a little more weathered, just a few years from now. The resemblance was close. I could see myself all too clearly in that old butterscotch Pontiac. And I flatter myself to watch me until I was utterly gone over a distant hill.
Portis is up there with the greats. I mean, the 20th century masters. He captured America and Americana in a way that no other writer has done, in my opinion.
There's something to be said about the appeal of a writer who is not trying to write these books that you learn stuff from. You know, he's not making these grand statements. His books are more about the texture and the fabric of life.
Writers write for different reasons. I think that Portis wrote for posterity, not for today, so the sales figures are irrelevant, and his status among academics is irrelevant. It's what is this book going to mean to people in 100 years?
I admire him. I admire someone that was that bold, And you know what? It should be a model for artistic boldness for any writer to aspire to. And it's about following your inner voice and following your own truth in terms of what you write.
People don't write books of criticism about Charles Portis because, you know, the better you do something, the more perfectly you do something, the less there is to be said about it. And so he's just going to have to live with the fact that he wrote 5 beautiful books.
It just looks incredible. Roger Deakins just has such an incredible eye, and every single frame of the movie is just you know, beautiful.
For my money, Roger is the finest cinematographer alive today.
There should be one there. I have an overall kind of approach to cinematography, that it should be as simple and as submissive to the script as possible, really. Because I think so much is about the relationship with the camera and the actors. You know, I love the idea of seeing Rooster for the first time from Maddie's point of view, but not getting a clear view of him. And gradually, as she came into the courthouse and moved around him, he sort of revealed, you know. And then I wanted to feel this sort of shafts of sunlight just blasting through these lower part of the blinds and the windows. But then I also wanted to feel the darkness and the feeling of the oil lamps, you know, in the room, or gas lamps as they were.
The courtroom scene was really a spectacular day because Roger Deakins was shooting it. And the lighting in that room was just spectacular.
I believe you testified you backed away from Aaron Warden.
That's right.
Which direction were you going?
I always go backwards when I'm backing up.
To me, one of the iconic images out of the film is the hanging man in the tree that they come across in the forest of Cottonwoods. Originally, we were looking for a location that was this, like, empty plain with a stand of 3 or 4 trees. One day we were driving to Los Alamos to look at a location up there, and down in the valley there's this whole strand of cottonwoods. And I said one day, well, why aren't we looking there? That might be kind of interesting. So the whole thing sort of changed from being one look to being this other look. I think, to me, it's an amazing image, all these kind of dead-looking wintry cottonwoods and this body hanging. Also, we needed this little montage sequence, and I said to the guys, oh, wouldn't it be kind of interesting if we did a crane shot? So they're not just on the horizon, but as they're riding across the horizon, the camera's moving, but what you see is the mountains appearing in the background of the shot. It's like almost like the mountains are growing behind them. I just love playing with visuals, so if somebody gets it, if somebody appreciates your work and the film as a whole, that's kind of nice, yeah.
Thank you.